You have to go down to the core of what parenting is all about. And I'll tell you what I think the greatest error that people make, and I think most people don't, but when they do make this error, it's devastating, with incredibly devastating consequences. And that is, a child is able to tell whether the decisions the parent is making regarding that child is about the child or is about the parent. When a parent says, I want a child to behave a certain way, when I want the child to dress a certain way, I want a child to attend a particular school, are they thinking about, well, that's what's best for the child? Or does the child see the father or mother is worried about the image of the family? Or I wanted to become a doctor, so I want you to be a doctor. Or I want you to go to this yeshiva because I want to be able to tell kids, my friends, that I have a son in that yeshiva. Kids know that.
Welcome back to another episode of Inspiration for the Nation. My name is Yaakov Langer, and I am excited for this episode. I'm excited for every episode, but I'll tell you why this episode is a little different. So 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, when I got into the podcasting space, I sat down and I said, okay, who are the number one people I want to interview? And there's obviously a lot of people that come to mind. Okay, that person and that guy and that Rav and that woman and so many people. And there's also people that are like, oh, no one knows about them. We got to talk to them. I would love to talk to them. And then there is someone, Moishe Bane. And I reached out to him and I called him. And I was so intimidated by him. Not because he's an intimidating person. You'll hear in this episode, he's so easy to connect with, easy to talk to, easy to hear out. But the accomplishments this man has accomplished is just wild. And I didn't even reach back out to him because when I have these calls, preliminary calls, I'm like, okay, I have an angle, I know a direction. I said, I don't have 20 hours to talk to you about everything, whether it's your personal life or just the OU within itself. So I didn't reach out to him. And some time went by and I was talking to my friend Zevi Wallman and it was obvious that I had to sit down with him. And I told Zevi, I'm like, I would love to sit down with him. I'm so overwhelmed. So I hope I do a good job in asking him the right questions because we spoke for 30 minutes after and that it's within itself could have been recorded. So Moishe Bane is the president of the OU, current president. You'll hear at the end what he has to say. And there's so many life lessons in this episode. And if you ever enjoy these episodes, be a good listener and subscribe, whether on YouTube or Apple or Spotify, or share it with a friend. And this episode is in memory of Shimon, Dovid, Ben Yaakov, Shleima, as well as Miriam, Sarah, Bas Yaakov, Moshe. Their neshama should have aliyas. And I will tell you in the middle about a great giveaway that we're doing. We're partnering someone to give away a Tesla. Yes. So get ready for the Tesla giveaway from the CCF Raffle. We can all use some inspiration to help us overcome the obstacles we encounter in our lives. Get ready for thrilling conversations about struggle and triumph with those in pursuit of making a positive impact in this world. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. Starting off, could you tell us about your childhood, where you grew up and what it was like?
Sure. I grew up in Montreal, which was a great city to grow up in. Hockey and chocolate Danish were big things in Montreal, and it was a wonderful place. I grew up as a part of the Bnei Akiva movement very, very heavily. I went to Mosheva in Ennismore, Ontario for many years and played a big role in my childhood. It also instilled in me a tremendous sense of commitment to Zionism and Eretz Yisrael. And at the age of 14, I left, ran away from home in essence, and went to Baltimore, to Ner Israel. And was there for many years, except for 1 year. After high school, I went to Gush, which was a little bit of an anomaly. But the bigger anomalies, I went back to Ner Israel afterwards. Okay. And I stayed there until I went to law school.
Do you know French?
One of the reasons I left is because I'm terrible at languages.
Okay.
So I figured, okay, let me get out of here and go to a place where everybody speaks the language I know.
Interesting. Okay, so what drew you to Ner Yisrael?
Well, the truth is my father, Olav Shalom, wanted me to go to Ner Yisrael once he saw I was going to demand to go to yeshiva because he was very adamant that I go to college. And I was worried. In Montreal, the right-wing yeshiva is called Yeshiva Gedola. I don't know the culture today, but in my time, Ramatel Weinberg Zatzal was the Rosh Yeshiva who was a Telzer, very anti-college, very anti-Zionism. My father couldn't handle it. Nei Yisrael was a moderate place, so once he saw that's the direction I was heading, Nei Yisrael was the appropriate place for him, and I was comfortable with that.
At what point did you decide to go into the law career?
So I decided probably about when I was about 21. At that point, until then, I was vacillating between a number of different roles, but I saw that I wasn't reaching the level of scholarship in Hasmada that my peers were, who were going to go on to become Talmidei Chachamim and go into Klei Kodesh on a professional basis. So I decided I was going to, and it wasn't just me, it was me and one of my friends, we decided we were going to be as committed to Klal Yisrael and as committed to helping the Jewish community as our peers were, who were going to become Rosh Yeshivas and Rosh Kollel and Rabbanim, by going to law school and using that as our platform to do things for the community.
It's an interesting idea. Maybe it's not as common today, or maybe it wasn't so common then as well, for someone to say that I really want to use my parnas or whatever it is in my lifetime to make a difference in the klal. Like, where did that spark come from?
Well, it's interesting. I could attribute it on its face to Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal, my Rebbe. He was my primary Rebbe for many, many years and continues to play a very significant role in my mindset and my decision making. And he was a very Klal Yisrael focused person. He spent a lot of his perspectives that he was sharing with us in the concept of that your responsibility is not only to raise your neshama, but to raise the neshama of Klal Yisrael. In fact, sometimes even at the sacrifice of your own interests. And that was the approach that we were all taught. The concept, the underlying concept, the word that would summarize it would be achrayus. That you have to have responsibility for more than yourself. And that's where, on its face, where I got it. But when I look back at my earlier days, I don't know where I got it, because I'll give you an example. When I was 13 years old, Yom Kippur War broke out. And I was in 7th grade at the time, and I spent a week running around Montreal with old ladies collecting checks of people who had made donations for the state of Israel during the war. That didn't come from Weinberg. I didn't know Weinberg yet. I don't know where it came from. I don't know.
How much money did you raise?
Whatever. I don't know. In those days, I don't know, $40. Who knows what it was?
That's why they won, by the way. That's the secret.
Could be. We tipped the balance. And so I had some kind of connection to a sense of responsibility for the community. I could say for my parents, my father was certainly involved in the community. He was a treasurer of the day school and involved in the shul, but it wasn't a focus of our home. I don't know where I got it from.
Who was your friend? Is it a secret who your friend was?
My friend's name is Gedalia Litke.
Okay.
Gary Litke, Gedalia, who's also a lawyer today, who's very involved in community work as well.
And are you still as close?
We are, well, we all have our families.
Right,
and life happens. But we, for example, when we were in law school, and he was in Columbia, I was in NYU, in our last year, we started a major organization that still exists today. We were 25. He's a couple of years older than me. So we did that as a partnership. And the organization is called Kayama. It still exists today. It was an organization we created to encourage non-Orthodox Jews to give a get when they get divorced. And we've done thousands of getting over the years. Baruch Hashem, now it's run by a very capable person. His name is Dr. Yitzchok Skolnick. And it's played an important role for many people's lives. But that was our plan, and we each tried to focus on the areas that would be matim for us, and we've taken our directions.
So what was your strategy moving forward? You said, I'll become a lawyer and then on the side donate my time, I'll donate my money. Like, what was the strategy going in? So
the strategy going in was to use the platform of success in law as a credibility factor. You need, when you want to enter the community arena, you have to have some basis for people to want to listen to you. So you needed a foundation. I thought in those days, and I've changed my perspective on it, back in the 1970s and early 80s, I thought you needed to have a tremendous amount of money to play a role in the community. And I thought I would be a practicing lawyer for a couple of years and then go into business, make tons of money, and be a macher in Klal Yisrael.
Gevir.
That's right. That's what was my plan. But I discovered a number of things. Number one is I discovered I don't have the risk tolerance to ever become that wealthy. I can't take a risk. I had kids. I had mortgages. I learned who I was, and everybody has to learn who they are. So that was number one factor. So that went out the window. But I also learned that you really don't need that much money to be a voice in the community, to be relevant in the community. What you need is enough money to show up. You need enough money to be able to show up at a convention, to go on a trip. But what you need more than money is the ability to attract money and to attract supporters and to attract people who will follow your lead. And today, more than then, there are so many people with so much money that you can't even realistically aspire to get the $1 billion. I mean, that's not a derech hateva type of a function. So that's no longer a route that makes sense for a young person to pursue. But rather, go into a field that you could at least show up and then try to develop the kinds of credibility that people with the kinds of money that really make a difference on a financial basis will be supportive of you.
At what point did you join the OU?
So I joined the OU in 1990. It was an interesting decision I made at the time. What happened was, I mentioned a couple of moments ago, I had begun an organization together with Gedalia Litke called Kayama, and I thought that I was going to spend the rest of my career developing new projects, new organizations. And I discovered that there's a lot of similarities between communal work and business. So, for example, one of the early decisions that I had to grapple with was when a person leaves business school. Guy graduates from a prestigious business school, gets an MBA, wants to go out and make a lot of money. They have to make a fundamental threshold decision. Do I want to become an entrepreneur? Right? The classical, in my garage, start a business of some sort. Or
that's the key to success. You have to start in a garage, and then you're good to go.
That's right. It has to be in the garage.
Yeah.
Or you go work for corporate America. You go work for Google or IBM or General Motors, whatever the big companies are. And either way, you could turn out to be incredibly successful, and either way, it could be a total disaster. So you have to analyze yourself. You have to figure out, what am I good at? I'm good at working in a corporate culture and working with other people and listening to other people, or am I more entrepreneurial and less disciplined in that fashion, disciplined in other ways? I thought I was an entrepreneur. I thought I would spend my life doing new projects and developing new ideas. That's what I thought my strengths were. But then I discovered, after a few years in the Kayama arena, while I was practicing law, that there's also another similarity between business and Klal work, and that is, in order to be successful in business, when you are that entrepreneur in your garage and you start your mousetrap, there's going to be two things that are going to determine whether or not you're going to make money on that mousetrap. Number one is the quality of the mousetrap, the quality of your gadget or your service, whatever it is. But there's a second dimension, totally aside from your quality, and that is your distribution system. If you come up with the greatest invention in the world, but no one knows about it, no one's going to buy it, you're not going to make any money. And the same thing is true in community work. You can come up with this great idea for a project and put all the pieces together, but the community needs to know about it. You got to have a distribution system. And what I was discovering after a few years was that I was spending all my time on distribution. And I wanted to do product development. I thought that was the fun stuff. That's where I thought my creativity would come into play. And I was spending my time going around the country, giving speeches about the importance of the project and raising money and doing pamphlets and mailings. I don't want to do that kind of stuff. So I decided to do an analysis of where could I find a partner to join with who would do the distribution. And I did a survey of American Orthodoxy. I was pretty young still, and I came up with the conclusion that the Orthodox Union was by far the most expansive distribution system in North America. So I said, okay, I got to join the Orthodox Union. But then I realized another thing, which I've since confirmed on many, many occasions, that is, you can never go to an organization and say, I want to get involved. No organization wants people who come and say, I want to get involved. Right. What you need to do is figure out a way to get them to invite you to join. So I spent about 6 months figuring out how to do that. And they finally, it was an incoming president, Shelley Rudolph, who was a very, very dignified and wonderful man, and very committed and very idealistic. And he invited me to join the OU in 1990, so the plan worked. And I was able to use the OU distribution system for the last 30 years.
Well, that's amazing. Well, what plan did you devise that they are like, oh, who's this Mark Bane guy?
So it was Moishe Bane.
Moishe Bane. Not Rabbi Moishe Bane.
The only two worlds that I use the name Mark are either with my doctors on health forms or in my law firm.
Online also, it says Moishe parentheses Mark Bane. Okay. I now know what to title this episode.
Okay, no, whatever makes you comfortable. I want you to be comfortable here. So the plan at that time was, there was a very hot issue in those days, which still is a significant issue today, and that was the Aguna crises. And at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a very, very hot topic. And it was before there was a RCA prenuptial, and there was a lot of cases that were pending, and there was a lot of pressure on the large organizations to try to address the issue. there was a meeting of all the organizations, the Aguda and the OU and Young Israel and a couple of others, and they were trying to get together to come up with a solution that would at least tell the community we care, we're doing something. Because we had started this organization, Kayama, which really doesn't deal with Agunas, but does deal with Gittin, I was invited to come to the meeting to express our perspective based on our experience with Gittin. And I viewed that as my shot. And I learned then a very important lesson that I've carried with me throughout my career in Klal work, and it was more particularly relevant in my younger years, and that is, when you go into a meeting, what you're supposed to do is take responsibility to do everything that comes out of that meeting. Whatever ideas come up, you say, I'll take care of it, I'll do it. Because I learned throughout my career that you can really do anything you want in Klal work on two conditions. Number one is you do all the work, and number two is you give everybody else the credit. And if you're willing to do all the work and give other people credit, they'll let you do everything. So that's what I did on that project, and then I became very appealing.
But the first step I understand how hard it is, but the second step of like giving everyone else credit, you weren't worried that that's like not going to work because you want to get more out there, and now all of a sudden you say he did it, then you're going to lose out.
No, you'll gain. In the long run, you'll gain, because you're right. The general public won't know that it's you. And maybe even most people around the table won't know it's you. But the decision makers who you're giving credit to, they will know that it's you, and they're going to make sure you're at the table for the next project. And that's who you care about if your goal is to be impactful. If your goal is to make a difference, and I'll tell you a story. There was an event that we did at the Orthodox Union after Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik Zatzal passed away. He passed away over Pesach. And on Shavuos, I had come up with this idea that we should do a project to encourage shuls that weren't doing Tikkun Leil Shavuos, who weren't having people stay up the whole night and learn. Let's create a program, L'Zecher Nishmas the Rav, and get everybody to learn. And we put together a group of Rabbanim who prepared shiurim for every community to be able to use of the Torah of Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, and encourage them to have their community stay up and learn. And it was incredibly successful. We had hundreds of shuls that until that year didn't have that program, and I was doing all the work, putting together all the shiurim and making sure all the shuls would be on board. But no one knew it was me. The public didn't know it was me, and I was so proud of myself that look how L'Shem Shemayim I am. I'm doing all this work, and I'm not taking any credit. And then came Shavuos night, and I'm sitting in shul where I was, and someone gave over one of the shiurim that I had orchestrated being put together, and at the end he said, and I got to thank the Orthodox Union for doing it. And I'm sitting going, it was me. No one knows. And I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed that I cared that no one knew. But you try to live with yourself and try to get above it.
But how do you work on that practically? You
work on that by focusing on what you want the credit for. I'll tell you a story. My father-in-law, Zechus, he's a wonderful man, a tremendous, he's a tzaddik of a person, and very involved in the community for many, many decades. I was once walking with him down the street, and he bumped into one of his friends. And his friend started telling him, you know what I did this week, and I did this for this yeshiva, and I did this for this organization. My father-in-law was going, wow, that's incredible, so impressive. And then the fellow walks away, and I look at my father-in-law, and I said, I was with you this week. You did 10 times more. Why didn't you tell him anything? He said to me a very important secret. He says, don't think that I'm not a Balgaiva, but I'm such a Balgaiva, I can't admit that I care that what people think.
Oh, wow.
And that's what you have to work on yourself, to get above the need for public accolades and understand that's the higher level of chashivas.
Was there a specific topic, subject, movement, idea, organization that you really wanted to push in the 90s when you got to the OU?
Well, the agenda I had, let me give you a little bit of background on my strategy in community work, because it really goes to all the things I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Sure.
When I was in yeshiva, there were two types of Talmidei Chachamim. There were guys who went into a particular dimension of Torah and became a master, whether it was Choshen Mishpat or Gittin or Kabbalah or Tanakh, and they became a master of the field. And they became very well known as masters. And then there were fellows who were not a master of any field. They learned Torah generally. They knew a lot about a lot of things, but they were a master of no single field, nowhere near the level of scholarship of those who had chosen a particular field. But they had a breadth, and they had a spectrum. When I got involved in community work back years ago, I noticed that the vast majority of people I was encountering were specialists. They had their field. There were day school guys, there were mikveh guys, and there were Beis Din guys, and all different issues that they were grappling with and they were focusing on. I said, there needs to be broad vision people. There needs to be people who know the entire spectrum. So what I decided way back 35 years ago is that I would become that kind of person, and every 4 to 6 years I'd go into another field. And for four years I ran NCSY as the lay leader and learned kiruv, and then for 6 years I did political stuff for the OU, and then I spent 4 years as chairman of the synagogue. And I got involved a little bit for a couple of years in the local day school to learn day school. And that way I'm not an expert in anything. I don't know that much about anything.
And you planned that?
Yeah, that was a deliberate strategy that I had. And I figured, okay, one day I'll have some grand vision that other people are going to be too myopic to realize, and maybe my perspective will have value to the community.
That's very interesting. I'm curious how many people go through so many transitions deliberately, and even if they accidentally do it, I see this as like good chizik for someone saying, okay, even if you do something for 6 years, and at least me, I'm young, I'm 30 years old, like I think like, okay, for the rest of my life, what I'm doing now, I'm going to be doing. But it's like, no, maybe for a tekufa, a chapter in your life, that's what you'll be doing. And then later on in life, you'll be using tools from what you learned from that experience to really go and get to the next stage or level that you want to go to.
Well, I would suggest two things. Number one, the most important is to always be deliberate in choosing what you're doing. And most people don't. Most people just go with the flow and don't have a deliberate strategy, and that limits them. And it's a pity because people are not realizing their full potential because of that. But number two is, and this is even a greater flaw in how we're trained and what we are normatively comfortable doing, and that is to appreciate that life is full of multiple stages. And every stage, we're a completely different person. And we have the benefit of everything we've done until now, but now we're a different person. And we should reevaluate and assess, should I be continuing to do what I've been doing until now? Or do I now have a new set of skills and maybe even weaknesses that I have to work on? People live a monolithic life. That doesn't create greatness. That doesn't create their true potential. You have to continually be reevaluating, okay, this is what I've been doing until now. Now what should I do going forward? Maybe I should continue, but that's a new decision to be made.
We'll be right back to this week's episode, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you see a brand new Tesla that could be yours right behind me. What do I mean by that? Okay, so the Chicago Chesed Fund is having their 8th annual Tesla raffle. That means you could win a Model 3, Model S, Model X, Model Y, or even the Cybertruck, or $50,000 in cash. Woo, that's amazing. Okay, so let me tell you about Chicago Chesed Fund and why I feel honored to partner up with them. So you have organizations that help people, and that's great. Chicago Chesed Fund helps over thousands, I don't know the exact number, thousands upon thousands of people in the Chicagoland area with so many things. They have 80 plus programs that let me just go through the list. They got food pantries, they got job assistance, they got mental health referrals, they got government, they help you with government programs, which I know is so complicated, and they got the people in there to help the people out. They help with fertility treatment, and what's beautiful about the organization is it's not just handouts. They help get people back on their feet, which is the ultimate tzedakah. No one wants to be feeling like they're just a handout. They want to feel good with themselves, and that's what the Chicago Chesed Fund does. And who started it? Yes, the Dayan Shmuel First, who I'd love to interview. They've been around for over 35 years, and the raffle is happening very soon. The drawing is September 5th, 2022. But wait, there's more. Yes, Inspiration for the Nation fans will get an extra bonus. All you gotta do is go to ccfraffle.com and put in the code word Lchaim. That's LCHAIM for $25 off for 2 tickets or more. So typically 2 tickets would be $200. You get them for $175. But that's not even the best part about this. The best part about this is you're helping people in Klal Yisrael. You could be an inspiration for the nation. I always say to myself, how could people listening, they want to do more? Well, you can, besides for helping out my channel if you buy a ticket, but you actually help out so many people in Klal Yisrael. And the best part is they're selling less than 10,000 tickets. So pretty good chances. I know the Mega Millions was a few weeks ago, and what are the chances of that? This, you're guaranteed 100% to be helping thousands of people in Klal Yisrael, plus you might win a Tesla. So go ahead, and also in the show notes, you can get a ticket Please buy. Thank you. Back to this week's episode.
There's so many questions I have about the OU, and my question that I'm thinking now is like, I'm sure there's been many challenges at the OU for you, but what's been the biggest challenge in your past 30 years? Maybe it's an initiative, maybe it was, I don't know, it could be anything. Well, yeah, hold on. I'll give you a little time to think about that. Before that, because I'm realizing I'm talking about the OU because I know what it is. But for people that don't know what the OU is, because I think a lot of people know about the Hechsher, from the OU, and a lot of them know about different things that the OU does. But could you explain who the OU is and what the OU does?
Okay, who the OU is a little amorphous. It is nothing tangible that you could identify. This is what it is. What it is, however, is a representative body of the American Orthodox community in a very, very broad-based way. I mean, it probably is the most broad-based entity representing Orthodoxy that maybe exists anywhere in the world, but certainly in North America. The spectrum of our community is extremely wide, very deliberately so, because we believe that a kehillah has to be comprised of its entirety, and not just I'm representing this kind of Orthodox Jew or this kind of Orthodox Jew. And we try to involve ourselves and counsel to what the needs are of a broader spectrum. Our goal is, in the broadest way we can, to elevate the religious experience of American Jewry. That's what we're trying to do, to allow Jews to be Orthodox, to practice their orthodoxy, which comes up in areas like making sure there's kosher food available, making sure that the government doesn't impose laws that are going to be detrimental to being an observant Jew. And in addition to facilitating the opportunity to be Orthodox, to give the community the tools to be as engaged in Ruchnius as they could be. So for example, we have a broad-based array of Torah programs that makes it accessible for people who would otherwise not have access to learning Torah at the levels that they could. We have other kinds of programs. We have a kiruv organization, which is probably the largest kiruv organization in a unit in the world called NCSY, which is intended to do twofold things. Number one is to deal with kids who are in a totally secular environment. It's called JSU, which is dealing with public school children. And then we have an enormous amount of programs for yeshiva day school kids, all of them with the same goal, to elevate people's religious experience. We've suffered in America for the last 50 years or so with a tremendous success. And the suffering that we've had is that the success has really been born out of a sociological, almost cultural strategy to make people feel comfortable to be part of the Orthodox community. And it's been incredibly successful. And it was very deliberate, I believe, and very, very justified. I would have done the same thing if I'd been in that role 50 years ago. But now that we've created this incredibly robust and vibrant community, it's time to now focus on the depth of it. And the depth of it has to be deeper understanding of Judaism, deeper understanding of God and our relationship that we're trying to pursue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what we're trying to do.
Wow. Okay. That is a good description. So what's the biggest challenge that you've had?
I'll tell you one thing. The challenge that I thought I would have in my current role never came to fruition.
Okay. What is that?
I thought that, and this is like the folklore of Klal Yisrael, that you get involved in responsible positions, people are going to beat you up everywhere you go. And everybody's going to criticize you. And I was, trying to get myself ready for that onslaught of attack. And when I started my role 5.5 years ago, it never happened. Never happened. And I traveled the country together with my wife for the last 5 years. Everywhere we go, people are welcoming and express gratitude and appreciation. And the attacks never came. The only time you have any attacks, and they're very, very rare, are anonymous attacks online. But even those are very, very few and far between. So what I thought would be the biggest challenge on a ego basis, or on a, you prepare yourself saying, I have thick skin, I'm going to do what's right no matter. The bigger challenge, and as I'm speaking, I'm beginning to realize that that's the biggest challenge, for me at least, particularly in my current role, is psyching myself into believing that I'm qualified to make some of the decisions that I'm being asked to be involved in. It's a problem. We're human beings, and we know ourselves more than anybody. We know our weaknesses, we know our biases, we know our deficiencies, and yet when we take responsibility for others, we begin to have an obligation to make hard decisions that we know we're really not qualified to make. I'll tell you a story that really sums up my life in the Orthodox Union and in Klal work in general. This took place about 15 years ago. And this story really says it all. So I was at this meeting. I wasn't present at the OU. It was some unrelated relationship. And there was this big meeting for a mega decision that was going to impact American Orthodoxy. And I go to shul the next morning. I walk into shul, and a friend of mine, this is a friend, this is not an enemy, a friend comes over to me and goes, Bane, you're a good guy, but what shaykhus do you have to be involved in that kind of decision? Who do you think you are? So I said, I'll tell you a story, true story. He said, Rav Ruderman Zatzal, he was Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael. He was the founder and the Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael, passed away many years ago. And when we were in yeshiva, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. We didn't view him as a Talmid Chacham. We didn't view him as a tzaddik. We viewed him as God. I mean, he was like above life to us. When he walked down the hall, we stood up in awe, and he deservedly so. One day, he was walking down the educational building where the classrooms are, and one of the kids, probably a kollel guy's kid, 5, 6 years old, runs over to him and says, Rosh Yeshiva, I have Rosh Yeshiva's picture. And the Rosh Yeshiva goes, what's meant is my picture? He goes, Gedolim cards. I have the Rosh Yeshiva's Gadol card. And Rav Ruderman goes, Gadol, I'm not a Gadol. Let me see. The kid gives him the cards. He starts looking through the cards. He goes, if they're Gedolim, I'm also a Gadol. So I said to this fellow in shul that morning, I said, look, you're right. I have no shaykhus to that meeting. I have no eligibility. I'm really not prepared. But if you saw who else was in the room, it's not so bad that I was in the room. That's how I justify my involvement in the harder decisions and the harder challenges that we have. Yeah, you're right. I'm really not appropriate to it. But I don't know. Look around. I don't know who's stepping up. You got to step up when no one else is.
I heard recently that, like, on a different podcast, not even a Jewish podcast, and they were mentioning how so often we always think there's people that know everything about everything. So obviously there's the idea that Talmidei Chachamim know a lot more, but no one, Hashem is the only one who knows everything. And there's always moments in everyone's life of like, I don't really know exactly what to do, but I'll use my seichel, I'll use my judgment, my experience, and I'll make a decision. And it's definitely nice to hear coming from you with someone at such a high position making such big decisions to say, I don't always know everything, but I'm going to try my best.
Yeah, I have a theory, and I have no idea if anybody else would agree with this theory. You know, I was always grappling with, why do we give kavod to community leaders? So one theory, which is a legitimate theory, is because we want to elevate the office, and we want to make people appreciate, we want people to be deferential. Over the years, I begin to think the reason you give kavod to a community leader is to give him chizuk, because he's saying to himself, who am I? What am I? No, we're telling him, no, you're choshev, you're choshev. To give him the fortitude to be able to make the kind of decisions that he has to make. I'll tell you a story that happened 3 years ago. There was a couple of very big decisions that I was grappling with, and most decisions I don't make myself at all, but I'm certainly taking the lead. And very often, as we do constantly in America, but very often when I go to Israel, I'll go to Gedolim in Israel to get their input in the decisions that we have to make, even though they're not our poskim per se, and we're not going to necessarily follow their lead. We have our poskim here, but we want to get input to broaden our perspective. I went to 4 different poskim, 4 different Gedolim on this issue. It wasn't a halacha, it was a public policy issue. I got 4 completely different pieces of advice. And the 4th Rosh Yeshiva, who I felt most comfortable with, after he gave me his perspective, I said, Rebbe, I just went to 4 Gedolim, each one of them a master and a world-renowned gadol, and each one gave me a completely different piece of advice. What am I supposed to do with that? And he leaned over the table and said to me, you're in your role because your job is to make the decision. You go to Gedolim to make sure you're not missing points. You're going to Gedolim to make sure you get all of their perspectives. But you got to make that decision. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu put you in this role. So that's what you have to do. And it takes a lot of guts to do it, but that probably is the biggest challenge you have when you take responsibility for others.
Being that you have such a macro lens to the community and for so long, what's something that you wish the community at large, the Orthodox community, could do better?
I think what we could do better is appreciate the responsibility we have for our actions in terms of honesty and responsibility towards others. And I don't mean chesed. We're very good at chesed. Our community is incredible at chesed. But it's sort of like, the famous story about Yankel the pickpocket. Yankel the pickpocket. Everybody in town knew Yankel was Yankel the pickpocket. And one day the Rav of the city was walking down the street and he hears Yankel screaming, Rabbi, Rabbi, Rabbi. And he turns around and Yankel is holding the rabbi's wallet. Rebbe, you dropped your wallet. Here's your wallet. And the rabbi goes, Yankel, you're your uncle the pickpocket. You steal wallets. You're giving me back my wallet? He goes, no, listen, Hashavas Haveda is a mitzvah. Business, business is business. And we have that dichotomy in our lives, and we have to start dropping that and understand everything we do is an avodas Hashem. One of the areas that you talked about earlier was going into law as a foundation for community work. But the truth of the matter is, going into a parnasa to support your family in itself is a tremendous maisa kedusha. It's a tremendous maisa avoda, and we don't have a deeper enough appreciation for that. Number one is supporting your family and allowing your children to learn Torah and to be properly fed and taken care of is a tremendous chiyuv and a tremendous mitzvah. But it also is a format in which you can be mekadesh shem shemayim on a constant basis. So you don't need to be involved in organizations to do for the community. In whatever field you're in, if you act like an Orthodox Jew is supposed to, and not go beyond the call of duty, just to be a mensch and to be considerate and be honest, that's askanis. That's being involved in klal work, because that's conveying where our mission is, which is to mekadesh shem shemayim.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. So, if someone listening wanted to make an impact, obviously, donating money to all the good causes out there, and so many under the OU, that's obviously there. Is that the biggest way someone could contribute, or is there more in, I guess, their time or their resources that they could give towards the community?
Well, I think by far the number one exercise or activity that a person could do to help the community, and it's only those people who are zocha to be parents, but bringing up your children is by far the most important activity you have to contribute to the community. Very often I'll meet people who are involved in the community in all kinds of ways and don't really give their full attention to their children. I think that's bordering on evil, and that's not what Kodesh Baruch Hu, that's not what God will want them to be doing. So when you talk about what the most important thing that people do for the community is raising their children properly. So that's number one. But number two is just to be thinking on an external basis, to be looking beyond yourself. People say to me all the time, look, I'm not an organization guy. I'm not going to involve in the OU or whatever other, even the local organizations. That's not who I am. So I'm not going to really be involved in the community. I said, well, that's not what chesed is. That's not what askanis is. Askanis is helping people using who you are and your strengths. And every one of us has an ability to help others. And someone says, well, what's my ability? Could you pack boxes for Tomchei Shabbos? Come on, you have the skill to do that. And even beyond that, if as I mentioned before, we've been traveling around the country, we've been meeting all kinds of people, both community leaders and regular members of the community. And when you start looking at their needs, what are the real needs of Klal Yisrael? It's probably true in the secular world as well, but I just am focusing on our community. The number one pain that people suffer today is loneliness. People are lonely. You could live in a world with a packed shul and a packed apartment building, and you're still lonely.
Oh, I'm going to add to that. You have 50,000 followers on Instagram, and you still feel super lonely, right? Maybe even more so.
And people are very, very lonely. None of us are incapable of picking up the phone and calling somebody and saying, how you doing today? Or going to visit somebody. And it's not just those who are homebound or ill, just regular people, a smile, a good word, reaching out, validating their existence. That's askanis. That's doing for Klal Yisrael. So everybody should be analyzing themselves. What are they capable of doing? What is the maximum they could impact? But everybody has a role to play.
That's really beautiful. I saw you write online. Maybe it was in Jewish Action, but I found the article online about parenthood. I want to dig into that a little more. I think it's one of the things that, there's a lot of things that you like to talk about, but I see there's something there. So I want to unpack that more, and maybe even particularly fatherhood. But what practically, what could we, or me? Let's go to me. What could I be doing better as a parent? Or
for all I know, you're doing everything perfectly. I don't know you. I don't know your children.
So typically, what could people be doing better that you see that they're lacking in?
Well, I think that you have to go down to the core of what parenting is all about. And I'll tell you what I think the greatest error that people make, and I think most people don't, but when they do make this error, it's devastating, with incredibly devastating consequences. And that is, a child is able to tell whether the decisions the parent is making regarding that child is about the child or is about the parent. When a parent says, I want a child to behave a certain way, when I want the child to dress a certain way, I want a child to attend a particular school, are they thinking about, well, that's what's best for the child? Or does the child see, the father or mother is worried about the image of the family? Or I wanted to become a doctor, so I want you to be a doctor. Or I want you to go to this yeshiva because I want to be able to tell kids, my friends, that I have a son in that yeshiva. Kids know that. And when kids get that message, then they're entitled in some ways to reject the parent, and the parent is critical to them and critical to their growth. You know, I remember years ago I was sitting at an Onik Shabbos. I was invited to a community. This is about 15 years ago. I was invited to a community, and we had an Onik Shabbos Friday night for men about fatherhood. I mentioned fatherhood before, and at one point, one of the gentlemen around the table said, well, can you tell me the number one most important thing that I could do to ensure that my son will grow up religious? I said, oh, it's very simple, very obvious. He goes, well, really, what is it? He goes, unconditional love. That's the most important thing. I go, wow, unconditional love. What does that have to do with God? I go, what does that have to do with God? So let me give you the following two scenarios. You have child number one. Child number one gets to 7th grade, 8th grade, gets a little more mature, and he hears his Rebbe or his Mora tell the class, you know, there's a God in heaven, and God cares about you, and thinks about you, and loves you no matter what happens. God cares about you. Okay? Two scenarios. One is a child from a home that father neglects him, cares about the father more than the son, is never really around either in time or attention. And he hears this is about God. He goes, yeah, right. There's a God like that? Yeah, right. It's fiction. The other son, in the second scenario, is my father is like that. Yeah, I get it. I get that there's a God like that. You need to model God for your child. How do you expect a child to believe there's a God in heaven who loves them if they don't have a parent who gives that unconditional love? So these are the kinds of conveyances that a parent gives to a child that are just critical, not only for the child's mental health and sense of self-worth, but for their religious experience.
Wow. You mentioned twice or three times that you traveled around, and I know the OU is involved in a lot of community building and things of that sort. So I imagine you've seen a lot of communities. Is there, and I know I gave you some questions before, but I'm just thinking of this naturally. Is there a community that you've gone to that you're like, wow, and no shame on the other communities, but one community in particular that you're like, they're doing something right. This is really beautiful. I really like this.
Well, I think our community
the five
here
towns?
in 5 towns is unbelievable.
Okay, nice.
But besides for that, I think that every community is different. It's very hard to say they're doing it right because everybody should be doing it differently. You know, one of the principles that the Orthodox Union has is that we try as much as we can to refrain from dictating standards and dictating behaviors because of the recognition that every community is so disparate in its culture and its background and its composition that you can't proclaim that this is what should be done. You go into many, many communities that are very different from each other, and each one is, yeah, that's what they should be doing there. And it's beautiful. So I think the beauty of a community, no different than a parent bringing up children, that every child should be treated differently and catered to based on who they are, communities are the same. And I think most communities in Klal Yisrael are doing a really good job in that regard.
That is very nice. Is there someone in Klal Yisrael that more people should know about? I'm sure there's a lot, but is there someone on your mind that is a rock star doing great things? And
I'll tell you, the OU has a board of directors which has evolved into an incredible group of people, men and women, who are incredibly smart and courageous and committed. And some of the younger folks who have joined the OU over the last 4 years, 2 years, 4 years, are outstanding. And a lot of them are going to become the superstars in Klal Yisrael. I think one of the areas that the OU looks at itself as is a development center. For example, we have a division which we mentioned before, NCSY, and NCSY has 2 constituencies. One are the children who come, the high school kids. We tend to cater towards high school kids. That's one of our constituencies. But we have a second constituency that in some regards is equally important, and that is the advisor group. I mean, every NCSY Shabbaton, every NCSY event has the students, but also has advisors, which tend to be college-age students who come and serve as mentors and as models. And our role is to give them an experience and train them for their achrayus in Klal Yisrael. And many of them go on to become significant leaders, both in Klei Kodesh as well as on lay leadership from that grassroots training. And I think the same thing is true with the OU board. We have young people coming in who are incredible, and we're hoping that the years that they spend through our work will evolve into some of the most significant leaders in the community, whether it's in the OU or outside the OU.
You're very politically correct, because a lot of times when I ask, like, what's the community, who's a person, and you say these unbelievable, incredible answers, but without giving a specific person. But these are fair, honest answers, so I appreciate it. So I want to get a little meta. So I'm officially running Living Lchaim over here. What advice would you give to me based on the podcasts and shows that I'm doing? I could always use advice. You could critique me. I don't know what it is, but I don't know. There's some, like, let's get personal over here. Like, what could I be doing better?
I have to admit, can I admit something here?
No, cool.
I listened to very few of your podcasts.
I think that's good.
I'm sorry.
No, I think that within itself is very good hadracha for me. I need to get out there more. Okay, good. So where do you see, I guess, the from community in 10 years and or the position of the OU in 10 years from now?
I think the community is growing, and I think the community is taking religion more seriously. If you look at the trajectory of the last 10, 15 years, the number of adults who are learning Torah on a consistent basis has skyrocketed. I think what we've done is we've evolved into an appreciation that Torah and education is not for children. It begins with childhood, but it's intended to be a lifelong mission. But we've only scratched the surface. When I go around the country and I see all the people now learning Daf Yomi, and we have a Smichat Chaver program that has been incredibly successful, and we have, I think, over 2,000 or 3,000 women learning every day on Tanakh in our Nach Yomi. It's still only a small percentage of the community. And I think that community is beginning to appreciate how vital it is to learn Torah and how much more enriched your Jewish experience will be when you learn Torah. And I'm expecting that there will be a continuation of that trajectory. And that trajectory of increased Torah learning as adults is going to change the entire experience of Judaism. I think it's very difficult to imagine spending your week, every day of a week, learning Torah and digging into what Yiddishkeit is all about, and then showing up in shul and not taking davening seriously. I think it's very difficult to imagine understanding what Shabbos is and then not having a real Shabbos experience. When you meet people who don't have meaning in their Yiddishkeit, it's because they're never learning what it's about. You know, one of the problems that we have is that we tend to be taught most of our Judaism as a child. And if we stop growing in that intellectual endeavor, what we understand Judaism to be is a very immature appreciation. And then when we're adults and we connect to halacha, whether it's a Pesach Seder or a Shabbos or putting on tefillin or whatever, it's very superficial. But if you have a world in which we're learning and we're growing in our understanding, every experience becomes a different experience. So that's where I'm seeing the community going, and I'm assuming that, look, my disclosure, I only have 5 months left in my role at the Orthodox Union, but we have an incredible group of people I mentioned before the board, and even more spectacular, our staff, our leadership on the professional side of each group is led by incredibly talented and committed idealists. We're going to continue in this direction to give the community the tools to continue to grow. And I'm very, very excited about the future of American Orthodoxy.
Is it known who's going to take you over?
Well, it's not officially known, so I don't know if it's appropriate protocol-wise,
Okay.
but there's a nominating committee that's now pending, and they're going to be putting out their slate in a couple
We should just tell everyone, I will be running for the... No. That would be a disaster.
But let me assure you the following.
Yeah.
One of the rules of the Orthodox Union is you cannot become president unless you're currently on the board. So all the board members would be incredible to be president, and it's one of them. And he's a very, very talented and committed and idealistic and with tremendous judgment and maturity. And we're all very excited about his presidency.
Are you at all nervous, like what your life is going to be after? You've been doing this for so long, and you know, we spoke in the beginning about like shifting and doing things for a certain amount of time, but like, are you nervous, like what the next step for you personally?
I'm terrified.
Really?
I'm terrified. And I spend literally sleepless nights concerned about it. What I'm concerned about, I'll tell you a thought.
Sure.
And then I'll put it in this context. When I was younger, I used to be a avid fiction reader.
Yes, I forgot to bring that up. Thank you for bringing that up.
I was avid fiction. And every good novel has a central character, and every central character has a defining moment. And the entire book is about that central character's defining moment leading up to it, and then the consequences of it. But there's always a moment in time that's what their life is about. And as I was reading these books and beginning to realize that dynamic, I began to say to myself, what's a Ben Torah? What's an Oved Hashem? What's someone who really wants to give their life to God? I said, you know what an Oved Hashem is? An Oved Hashem is someone who lives their entire life assuming their defining moment is yet ahead of them, no matter how old you are. And that's what I assume is the case. I've done a lot of great stuff. I'm hoping that it's a preparation for opportunities to do things in the future for Klal Yisrael, for myself, for my family. And I don't know what that's going to be. I mean,
you have no clue. In a year from now, you have no clue where you're going to be?
I have no idea.
That's going to be hard.
If you have any suggestions, maybe you could help me out here.
Lchaim, get involved with us. We'd love to have you. I don't know. That's very scary because you've been doing this for so long. I'm not here to make you more scared. But you have no idea what you're going to be doing?
I know that I'm at least planning to spend my entire time on community issues. I'm leaving my law firm practice as well at the end of the year with the premise that, okay, now I should have a clean slate. Baruch Hashem, our children are all married with their own families. And my wife and I are very eager to do as much as we can for the community. And what the role that we'll play, that's still out for grabs. I'm not sure. I'm
sure it's scary, but it's probably also, there's got to be some excitement there, just... I guess in a way starting new, not over, but new chapter.
It's intimidating, but it is exciting, but more intimidating than exciting.
That's fair. Is there a particular story that happened in your life or that you've heard that really inspires you?
I'll tell you a story that is non-inspiring and how I view it as being inspiring.
Okay,
and I'll tell you it in the context of a true story that happened. My oldest child is my daughter, Batsheva. She lives with her family in Atlanta, and my son-in-law is an incredibly talented and wonderful, wonderful man. When he was dating my daughter, he was learning in BMG in Lakewood at the time, and after one of the dates, he was going to Brooklyn to get a ride back to Lakewood. So I said, I'll give you a ride from 5 towns to Brooklyn. And he gets in the car, and we drove. And I deliberately got lost so we would have more and more time together. And I took him all the way to Lakewood, and I had a good chunk of time to talk. And I was asking about his visions for the future. You're dating my daughter, or what are your plans? That kind of discussion. And he told me about incredibly romantic ideas for helping Klal Yisrael and changing the world. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. He says to me, really? I go, what do you mean, really? Well, of course. He goes, you're the first adult that ever said it's fantastic. I go, what do you mean? What else should we be doing? He goes, well, everybody always tells me this famous story, and this is a story that I've heard attributed to the Lchaim and Rishon Solanter. So once I looked it up, it happens to be originated in a 6th century Chinese guy who says, famous story that we all tell over, that when I was 18, I wanted to change the world. And when I was 30, I wanted to change my country. And when I was 40, I wanted to change my community. When I was 50, I wanted to change my family. And now that I'm an old man, I know I should just change myself. And my son-in-law says, that's what everybody tells me whenever I give them my grand plans. And what's the message? The message is, don't worry about the world, just worry about yourself. And I said to my son, Ellie, my future son-in-law, I said, no, that's not what the story is. You know what the story is? The story is, if when you're 18, you don't want to change the world, when you're 80, you won't even want to change yourself. If an 18-year-old does not have the idealism and the hasaga of making a difference, they're brain dead, they're heart dead, they're neshama dead. That's what we all should have. And that's really the inspiration we have to have, that we can make a difference, whether it's starting a new organization or whether it's making sure that a lonely person feels good at the end of the day. That's what we should be doing.
Well, Mr. Moishe Bane, thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and please share this episode with someone that you think would enjoy it. Don't send it to someone who says, I would hate this episode, but knowing the content inside, I think everyone's going to love this episode. I am totally biased, so that makes sense. But if you haven't yet, go to ccfraffle.com. You could put in the code Lchaim, that's LCHAIM, and you'll get a discount, and you could possibly win the Tesla. I'm davening that I win, because I am definitely going to buy. Well, if I win, it'll be a little weird, because the people are like, it's not fair. Well, I have nothing to do with the raffle. I'm just promoting it, but I really want to win. But I would also be thrilled if someone who is a inspiration listener, if one of you guys win. That would be incredible. I'll even do a segment. If one of the people who listen to this podcast win because they use the code Lchaim, I will bring you on. And if you're like, no, I don't want to be brought on, then I won't bring you on. But that would make me thrilled. That would make me thrilled. Either way, thank you so much for listening. Keep on being inspirational. Lchaim. Living Lchaim.